Well, the primary less than 2 weeks away. We're spending our time talking to candidates. Today, we're talking to George Hornedo. George is a candidate in the 7th Congressional District, taking on incumbent Andre Carson, also challenger Destiny Wells, and former Center Township Constable Denise Paul. So, George, thank you very much for being with us. Always good to talk to you, sir.
No, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
So let me ask you a question. When did you hit your head, and was that head accident your decision to run for public office?
I mean, I totally get it, right? It feels crazy to do something like this, but I mean, I can't blame anybody for being disillusioned in this political moment. I feel like every time I turn on the TV or open up Twitter, it's something bad that's happening, right? But every time I knock on the door, every time I'm talking to a voter, I see something else, not just, the sobering reality of hearing about the challenges that people are facing in their daily lives, but also the resilience that they have, the hope that they have, right? And so that's kind of two different, stories side by side. And, I choose to believe in the resilience. I choose to believe in the hope. And if the choice is going to be between step away and step up, I'm always going to choose step up. And so, not everybody has to step up, running for Congress against an 18-year incumbent. But I think people are stepping up in different ways, whether it be voting, and you've been writing a bit about, and we've been tracking closely just how many more people are turning out, and not just how many more people are turning out, but who's turning out. A lot of non-habitual primary voters are the folks turning out, right? And so, the thought process for me was really about the fact that this is a safe Democratic seat. And so by and large, you're going to have a safe Democratic vote. And so while there are certainly some policy differences, between me and the congressman, whether it be around ICE overreach, whether it be around data centers, my qualms with him are less around his voting record than it is how he uses or rather doesn't use the platform. So I think sometimes that means, go ahead.
So what's your core argument for voters and why you think this seat needs new leadership?
I mean, we need somebody that's going to step up. I mean, I think about three different things, uncomfortable truths that we need to talk about. One, accountability. And I am 100% funded by individuals, 80% of which are small dollar donors and donations. Compare that to the congressman, where 73% of his money comes from PACs, much of it corporate PACs like BlackRock and AES and defense contractors, and only 7% of his funds are small dollar donors and donations. I'm also proud to be the only candidate in the race that has never taken a corporate PAC check. And it is me and my scrappy under-resourced grassroots campaign, and as a first-time candidate, that has 4 times as many in-district donors as an 18-year incumbent who's part of a family legacy of 50 years of elected office and service. And so that's very telling. And so people deserve questions as to when, the congressman's out there voting, who is he voting on behalf of? I think number 2, we've got to think about effectiveness. Again, as much as I like and respect the congressman, we have to tell the truth because we can't fix what we refuse to face. The Center for Effective Lawmaking, which is a nonpartisan institute, consistently ranks him near the very bottom, in the bottom 10% in legislative effectiveness for all members of Congress, including House Democrats. He claims 22 bills, signed into law, over a number of different presidents. But what he doesn't say is only 2 of those were standalone bills that he was the lead sponsor of. And both were ceremonial, renaming a federal building and naming a memorial. We also lag behind peer cities across the country in how much federal funding we've been able to bring home. And so he tries to pull the wool over our eyes, think that we're dumb, and say, oh, I brought $13 million here to the community via earmarks, community project funding, when every member of Congress is giving up to 15 projects that they're able to fund. So that's not money that he really had anything to do in terms of working to get. Right. In my professional life before getting into this race, in just 3 years from private practice, I was representing Miami-Dade County, Birmingham, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi, Little Rock, Arkansas, and even the African American Mayors Association, and was able to secure nearly $800 million for these communities, which is almost as much as the congressman has done in 18 years as a member of Congress. So one, I want to be a more effective legislator, and bring more money home. And then the third piece that I think we just have to be honest about is, I know you're on the other side of the aisle. It's totally fine, but I'm tired of 21 years of one-party Republican rule. I mean, more broadly, I don't think 21 years of one-party rule by any party necessarily lends itself to the best outcomes, because then you don't have to work with people. And back when Julia Carson was in this seat, this was the best district in the state in voter turnout. And that's also when we had more balanced government and Democrats were competing, even winning statewide. Under Congressman Carson, this is now the worst district in the state and voter turnout in a state that already ranks near the very bottom, recently was dead last. And so for Indy to be one of the least engaged places politically in the country is not just embarrassing, but it doesn't have to be this way. Republicans only have an inherent 9-point advantage in the state, but they're winning statewide by 20 points, and that's in large part because we have to refuel the engine that is Indianapolis to power Democratic growth statewide.
Let me ask you, and George, let me ask you a question, because you brought up an interesting point about voter turnout in the whole 9 yards. The one thing I've noticed, and by the way, George Hornedo, candidate for Congress, Democratic challenger, 7th Congressional District against Andre Carson, our guest on the program today. One of the things I've noticed when it comes to voter turnout, I mean, we can expand voter hours and get voter citizens, blah, 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 but nothing increases turnout like good, healthy competition. If there's a competitive race and it's not just token competition, yep, people will turn out. If you look at Democrats across the state of Indiana, they feel that candidates in basically in 70 to 80, like 90% of all House and Senate districts. So from that perspective, there will be turnout. I suppose my question is the turnout because no one's just mounted an effective challenge against Andre Carson?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'll give you some of the numbers. This is at least for the 15th. I haven't pulled from yesterday yet, but 1,056 in-person voters. Within that is 1 point. I put a press release out. I think 129% more in-person early voters at this stage than in
2024. Exactly.
Yeah, 112% more than in 2022. And then for those that naturally, understandably say, well, actually, this is national mood because of everything that's happening with the Trump administration. Well, what I pose to those folks is that this is still 30% more in-person early voters at this stage than in 2018 during that first post-Trump midterm. And so to your point, it's definitely beyond national mood. It's the fact that we have competitive primaries, and I believe that iron sharpens iron, and we see it not just in this race, but started a bit of a trend. We see competitive races in trustee races across the city. We're seeing a competitive sheriff's race. And I think the more credible candidates that are running and putting forth a vision and giving people an actual choice and making incumbents, consistently earn, trust and earn votes rather than assume it, I think that's only beneficial for the party. And going further than that, actually, so that's in-person early voters. Within that universe, crunch the numbers a bit, 50% of in-person early voters so far are people that voted in the 2022 midterm primary. The other 50% did not. And in fact, 27% have either not voted in a primary at all, or at least not voted in a primary from 2020 and beyond. And so that's very telling that we are rebuilding an electorate here. And that's in large part, I believe, to the year-round organizing that we've been doing. I believe in, bottom-up politics, because the traditional model, Abdul, as you know, is top-down, where I would, be raising money all day, every day, talking to donors that aren't even invested in this community or from the state. I'd hold on to that money to then in the final days, just like right now, hit people with TV ads, hit people with ads on social media. But what I see as the biggest problem in our politics before you get to policy or message or messenger is an erosion of trust in our leaders, in our parties, in our systems and institutions that are failing us, right? And so you don't solve that issue top down. And so when I came into this race, we decided that it's a vehicle, not just to hopefully elect me, but a vehicle for rebuilding the party from the bottom up, a vehicle in the midst of the redistricting fight for grassroots defense. We became the largest Democratic field operation in the state to combat against it, and a vehicle for mutual aid during the November shutdown when there was a food stamps lapse, and the work that we did to connect, different organizations, community members, the work that we did to surface what are the resources that are out there, and what are the new resources that are popping up, and spread the word there. Because, there is both actual power, and the reality is we don't have a lot of actual power as Democrats in DC right now, but there's symbolic power. And how do you use the platform and the pulpit to still force conversations, to bring people together, to break down silos, to do good? And so, we think we take a lot of credit for what's happening, because this is really the first credible primary challenge and challenge generally, not just in this race, but we haven't seen credible mayoral challenges or anything kind of top of ticket like that. And what's also interesting is for the mail ballots that have been returned as of yesterday, 49% of those were people that have not voted in a primary at all, or at least not voted in a primary from 2020 and beyond. Only 34% of those mail in ballots that were returned were people that voted in the 2022 midterm primary. So something is happening in Indianapolis right now. And on May 5th, we'll all figure it out exactly what that is.
George Hornedo, our guest on the program today. He's a candidate for Congress, the 7th Congressional District, taking on Andre Carson, Destiny Wells, and Denise Paul Hatch. You laid out, George, a vision for your roads and infrastructure plan proposal. I suppose my question is, how do you make that happen?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, I know that roads here are an issue, right? I feel like
Tell me about it.
trying to
Like play
navigate
the old moon buggy game.
right. I would not have told you though, Abdul, before getting into this race, that it would far and away be the number one issue that I hear about from folks. When I talk about that bottom up campaign, we have knocked over 40,000 doors to date, on track to hit about 50 plus thousand. We have made over 1.5 million direct voter outreach attempts, and we have had over 16,000 direct one-on-one conversations with voters. That is separate and apart from community events, from earned media, from social media, etc. So what it's done is it gives me a bit of a heat map, on the city and the issues that people are facing, and what's most important. And this beats everything, even all the different buckets under affordability. And there's an argument to be made that this is an affordability, issue as well. And so when I talk about it, some people say, well, that's a state or local issue. So, what does a congressman have to do with that? And I said, anything that's a state or local issue can also be a federal issue. So I think about it in two ways. One, if I am more proactive in building a robust, competitive grant seeking, operation, which happy to go into that, but it's very in the weeds. And bring money to the community on any given issue, does that free up the city budget to put more money towards infrastructure? I obviously can't make the mayor and the council do that, but I can allow, for the circumstances to allow for that. And so that's one, but that's a drop in the bucket because we're talking a $600 million a year shortfall. So then I think about the Surface Transportation Reauthorization, Act and program. That is it's basically federal road funding, and it is a federal funding formula, program, which what that means is that it is a set amount of money that automatically goes to states based off population, not based off of need, for states to administer as they see fit, right? So here in Indiana, with that money, they, came up with their own formula, right? In which Indianapolis, 8,000 miles or something like that of road, but the way the formula is set up, we're getting paid for like 3,600 miles or something of that sort, right? This is not unusual. A lot of the cities that I've represented that I mentioned earlier are Democratic cities and Republican states. And there's that same dynamic where the state will kind of withhold its fair share of funds, from the community in ways that at face value are fair, even if it's not. And then the state will blame the city for its challenges and use that as rationale and justification to continue. So the pattern of the state blaming the city rightfully blaming the state, and federal representation sitting on the sidelines and saying, not my job, that's not working. And the reality is when I'm talking to people across the community, they don't care, what level of government is to solve an issue. And they don't know either. They just want to see their solutions, solutions to their challenges, right? And so what if there is a coalition of members of Congress in similar communities that were pushing to adjust the federal formula in some way, shape, or form to take some of this nuance into account? Because I may not like what Republicans are doing nationally right now, but you can't say that they're not showing just how fragile our systems and institutions are in the ways in which we've been doing things. And I've never been one to take the answer of, well, that's not how we do things. It's never been how we do things. If things aren't working, you got to fix it and you got to find a new way. And so obviously I would love for that state road formula, to be adjusted. I'd love for a better working relationship, between the mayor's office, and between the governor and the state legislature, so we could get more done for Indianapolis rather than it be this combative, antagonistic thing. But in absence of that, what can I do as a member of Congress? And this is it. It's to try. It's to force the conversation. It's to think outside of the box because to adjust the formula, that's not sexy. It's not headline news. It is a system gap issue. It is a system design issue, but with high leverage, it would have a transformative impact for a community like Indianapolis, not just on our roads, but across a slew of different issues because you're addressing a formula at the end of the day. So again, I know it's very in the weeds, but just to give you a sense of what I mean when I talk about fixing the roads.
George Hornedo, our guest in the program today, candidate for Congress in the 7th Congressional District. So we're talking about his campaign and why he's running the whole 9 yards. George, obviously, you're an attorney. Sorry about that. My apologies. Join the club.
Recovering, right?
Yeah, recovering.
Yeah.
A couple things. I did some checking. You were involved in some litigation. I think it's still ongoing with the case of Jennifer Watts, defamation, the whole 9 yards. You got some pretrial motions hearings coming up early January. Obviously, you don't talk about pending litigation, which no one would want to do. But so my question is, what should voters take into account if they ask you about that? What are sort of the public facts you can disclose, and also the fact your hearing is set for I want to say like January 17th. So if you got elected to Congress, you had to be back on the plane, be back for trial.
Well, yeah, I mean, for one, obviously, don't have the lawyer, can't speak towards much, but I mean, the long and short of it is that it's a disgruntled. It is a situation in which we needed to part ways with an executive director. Feelings are hurt over that, understandably so. And we just had to do what was best for the organization. Everything was above board. The case is not going as one would want on that side of things. So this isn't particularly serious. And I'll probably stop there. We can talk off the record, but yeah. So the first time I've been asked about it too, so not particularly a concern for me.
No worries. On getting back to the campaign related issue, obviously you're running against the incumbent congressman. So is Destiny Wells. So is Denise Paul Hatch. How do you guys? I guess are you so worried that you, Destiny, and Denise to a lesser degree may sort of split up that anti-Carson sentiment that may be out there, and Carson wins because remember you don't need a majority, you just need a plurality, which in this case would be like 37% of the vote in the 7th district.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is I see the race as less of a pro-Andre, anti-Andre electorate than it is a pro-Andre and open to an alternative. Certainly with any elected, there's going to be a small level of an anti piece, and the congressman competes within that open to an alternative area as well. I think you point to something to where obviously consolidation around a single challenger is preferable for those that have the goal of seeing new representation. The reality is that I am the only challenger with a path to victory in this race. I appreciate Destiny's runs before. I look forward to seeing what she runs for next. We are aligned on the issues in which she is bringing to the forefront because it's the issues that I've been bringing to the forefront since the very beginning of this campaign. And so I appreciate that she, echoes my sentiment on much of why we need new representation. But I'm carrying the mantle there and hope that voters see that I'm the path and the vehicle to push for change.
Final question for you, my friend. Obviously, like I said, once again, we've got less than 2 weeks to go as we record this conversation with respect to the primary. What's your game plan? How do you convince those voters who may not necessarily be on the fence? Obviously, Andre Carson is like a ton of name identification in the 7th congressional district. He may not be what you would do is say effective. Other people would say, well, Andre's never been a big policy congressman. He's always been, hey, Congressman, my grandmother can't find her Social Security check. We're having some issue here with Medicaid. My niece, she can't find her passport, so she and her fiance can go to Mexico. Can you help us out? Mm-hmm. And I would say that the thing is that Andre has sort of followed that Julia Carson mode, which is constituent service, not necessarily your great orator or great detailed policy person on raping water rights or something like that or whatever. So the question is, how do you run against the constituent service congressman as opposed to the quote unquote?
Yeah, I mean, so I'd actually push back on that a bit. And again, I'm not trying to be sharp in a negative way. There's a competitive primary, right? So it's really more about just kind of telling the truth. I mean, I certainly hear, and I love to hear, when stories from folks about that good work on the constituent services side. But more often than not, Abdul, I'm hearing about people feeling the lack of presence. I'm hearing about people feeling like he is not living up to Julia Carson's legacy and frustrated that he is not her because she was very present in the community and it was felt in a real way. And that's the thing that regardless of age, race, gender, income, township, whatever it might be, people are hungry for that. We talked about disillusionment earlier, and we talked about the idea of this being, safe seats. And it's not just this, it's everything from council on up, state legislature, Congress, mayor. You wake up, on election day in November and know that you're okay. And you don't typically have competitive primary challenges, if a primary challenge at all. And so then you get comfortable. And, being comfortable doesn't always lead to complacency, but it often does. And in this case, it has. And voters feel that. Residents in the community feel that. And when they feel that, they are disconnected from their government and from their leaders. Feeling disconnected then turns into disillusionment. The longer you're disillusioned, then eventually you disengage. And that's kind of the vicious cycle that we've found ourselves in right now. And so it's frustrating that this is where we are and that we have a member of Congress that can't show up. Yesterday at the Meridian Kessler Neighborhood Association meeting, he didn't show up. Last week at the Warren Township, a Democratic Club, candidate panel didn't show up. Even the Indiana Democratic African American Caucus, they canceled their candidate panel because I was the only one who confirmed, attendance. He does not show up for the community. People want somebody that is present, that is showing up, that is a fighter and fighting for them, not fighting for their donors. And a great example just to give of that, is, the data center, that was pushed down and shoved down the throat of folks in Martindale Brightwood community. I was proud to stand there with the community in opposition, to the data center. The congressman, I'd been looking everywhere to see if there was any sort of statement, nothing until the day of where he said it was an opportunity for the community to be heard. And then after it passed, he feigned concern around it, even though he was nowhere to be found prior. All while at the same time, in the front row is, folks from the law firm, that's one of his biggest backers, financially, that's supporting, the data center and representing the data center. And then our brothers and sisters in labor, who I appreciate, and it's unfortunate an issue like this is pitting working people against working people, and it's not lost on me that we then see a mailer going out, from one of the unions, afterwards. So, in terms of accountability, it's not always about buying a vote. Sometimes it's about buying silence. And Andre Carson has shown that he's a cheap date.
All right. Well, our guest from today has been George Hornedo. George is a candidate for Congress, the 7th Congressional District. George, if anyone wants to find more information about you, where can they go? Where can they find it?
GeorgeHornedo.com is my website. Hornedo spelled Hornedo. Also, I would definitely direct folks, whether you're supportive or not, to GeorgeHornedo.com/vote. So we created a tool that reduces some of the friction to be able to find your nearest polling location. Because IndianaVoters.com is the website everybody's directed towards now, but you got to go through a whole bunch of steps. And so little things like this are what disincentivize and make it harder for people to get the information that they need. My email is also just simply george@georgehornedo.com. And then my personal cell phone number, which I'm always open to taking folks calling, is 317-354-7073.
Right. George Hornedo, candidate for Congress. George, thank you very much for being with us. Always good to talk to you, sir.
Appreciate it. Thank you.